Gaza War, an ongoing conflict in the Middle East, has captured global attention since October 2023. This war, rooted in the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian and Gaza-Israel conflicts, erupted when Hamas and other Palestinian groups launched a surprise attack on Israel. The resulting violence has led to immense human suffering, widespread destruction, and a humanitarian crisis. In this video, we will explore the origins, key events, and far-reaching impacts of the Gaza War. Our journey will take us through the historical context, the major military operations, the toll on civilians, and the broader regional and international repercussions. Let's begin by understanding the background that set the stage for this devastating conflict. Truly grasp the Gaza War, we must look back at the roots of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The origins trace to the early 20th century, with the rise of Zionism and Jewish migration to Palestine. The 1947 United Nations Partition Plan and the subsequent 1948 Arab-Israeli War led to the creation of Israel and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Over the decades, the Gaza Strip became a focal point, especially after Israel's occupation in 1967 and the rise of Palestinian resistance movements. The First and Second Intifadas, Israel's withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, and the subsequent takeover by Hamas in 2007 all contributed to the region's volatility. These historical layers set the stage for the eruption of violence in 2023. Since 2007, the Gaza Strip has been governed by Hamas and subjected to a strict blockade by Israel and Egypt. This blockade, justified by Israel as a security measure, has been widely criticized by international organizations as collective punishment. The blockade has devastated Gaza's economy, restricted movement, and left the majority of its 2.3 million residents dependent on humanitarian aid. By 2023, over 80% of Gazans lived below the poverty line, with severe food insecurity and limited access to basic services. The blockade's impact on daily life has fueled resentment, despair, and periodic escalations of violence, making Gaza one of the most densely populated and troubled regions in the world. The years leading up to the 2023 war, tensions simmered between Israel and Palestinian groups in Gaza. Periodic clashes, rocket attacks, and Israeli airstrikes became almost routine. The situation was further complicated by internal Palestinian divisions, Israeli settlement expansion, and regional diplomatic shifts. In 2023, Hamas leaders cited ongoing occupation, the blockade, and perceived threats to the Al-Aqsa Mosque as reasons for their action. Diplomatic efforts to ease tensions, including talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia, failed to address the underlying grievances. The stage was set for a major escalation, with both sides preparing for confrontation. October 7, 2023, Hamas and allied Palestinian groups launched a coordinated surprise attack on Israel. Thousands of rockets were fired, and militants infiltrated Israeli territory, targeting civilian communities and military posts. The attack resulted in the deaths of over 1,100 Israelis, including many civilians, and the abduction of more than 250 hostages. The scale and brutality of the assault shocked Israel and the world, marking the deadliest day in Israel's history. The attack was described as a catastrophic intelligence failure for Israel and a calculated move by Hamas to force a new reality in the conflict. In response to the October 7 attack, Israel declared a state of war for the first time since 1973. The Israeli military, known as the IDF, mobilized hundreds of thousands of reservists and launched a massive counteroffensive. Airstrikes targeted what Israel identified as Hamas infrastructure, but also hit densely populated areas, resulting in significant civilian casualties. The government cut off electricity, fuel, and supplies to Gaza, intensifying the humanitarian crisis. Israeli leaders vowed to destroy Hamas and secure the release of hostages, setting the stage for a prolonged and devastating conflict. As the conflict escalated, Israel imposed a complete siege on Gaza, cutting off electricity, food, and fuel. The Israeli Air Force conducted relentless airstrikes, claiming to target Hamas militants but often hitting civilian infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, and residential buildings were destroyed, and thousands of Palestinians were killed or wounded in the first weeks. The blockade and bombardment led to severe shortages of water, medicine, and essential supplies, pushing Gaza's population to the brink of catastrophe. International organizations warned of war crimes and called for humanitarian corridors, but the fighting continued unabated. Mid-October, the Israeli military ordered over 1 million residents of northern Gaza to evacuate southward within 24 hours. The order was widely condemned as unrealistic and impossible to implement safely. Many families were forced to flee on foot, carrying what little they could while airstrikes continued. Some evacuation routes were themselves targeted, resulting in additional casualties. The mass displacement created chaotic scenes with overcrowded shelters and desperate conditions for those seeking safety. Both sides accused each other of endangering civilians, while international observers warned of a looming humanitarian disaster. Throughout the war, hospitals and schools in Gaza became frequent targets of airstrikes and ground operations. Israel accused Hamas of using these facilities for military purposes, while Palestinian authorities and international organizations reported devastating civilian casualties. Notable incidents included the bombing of Al-Ali Arab Hospital and repeated strikes on UN-run schools sheltering displaced families. The destruction of medical infrastructure crippled Gaza's ability to care for the wounded, while attacks on schools left children traumatized and without safe refuge. These events drew widespread condemnation and intensified calls for accountability. October 27, 2023, Israel launched a large-scale ground invasion of northern Gaza. Tens of thousands of soldiers, supported by tanks and artillery, advanced into urban areas. The fighting was intense and often took place in densely populated neighborhoods, leading to high casualties on both sides. Israeli forces aimed to dismantle Hamas's military infrastructure, but the urban warfare environment made progress slow and costly. Civilians were caught in the crossfire and entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. The ground invasion marked a new and deadly phase of the conflict. One of the most controversial episodes of the war was the repeated Israeli strikes on refugee camps, particularly Jabalia. These densely populated areas, home to thousands of displaced families, were hit by powerful bombs that leveled apartment buildings and shelters. Israel claimed to target Hamas commanders, but the attacks resulted in mass civilian casualties, including many children. The devastation at Jabalia and other camps became symbols of the war's brutality and raised urgent questions about proportionality and the protection of civilians under international law. Late November 2023, a temporary ceasefire was brokered with the help of Qatar and Egypt. The truce allowed for the exchange of hostages held by Hamas for Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Humanitarian aid convoys were briefly able to enter Gaza, providing some relief to the besieged population. However, the ceasefire was fragile and short-lived, with both sides accusing each other of violations. The exchange of hostages and prisoners highlighted the deep human cost of the conflict and the complex negotiations required to address it. Ceasefire soon broke down and fighting resumed with renewed intensity. Israel adopted new tactics, including a grid system for evacuation orders, but these were criticized as confusing and ineffective. Airstrikes and ground operations expanded to southern Gaza, pushing civilians into ever smaller and more crowded areas. Reports of mass detentions, friendly fire incidents, and attacks on aid convoys added to the chaos. The humanitarian situation deteriorated further, with food, water, and medical supplies running dangerously low. As Israeli forces advanced, the focus of the conflict shifted to southern Gaza, particularly the city of Khan Yunis. Intense fighting and bombardment forced hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee once again, many seeking refuge in the city of Rafah near the Egyptian border. The destruction of infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, left the population with few safe havens. The battle for Khan Yunis became a symbol of the war's relentless toll on Gaza's people and the challenges of urban warfare. Early 2024, Rafah became the last refuge for many displaced Gazans. Israeli officials announced plans for a major offensive in Rafah, raising fears of even greater civilian casualties. The United Nations and humanitarian organizations warned of famine, disease outbreaks, and the collapse of basic services. Aid deliveries were hampered by ongoing fighting and restrictions at border crossings. The world watched in alarm as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza reached unprecedented levels, with calls for an immediate ceasefire growing louder. As the war dragged on, attacks on aid convoys and humanitarian workers became increasingly common. Convoys carrying food, water, and medical supplies were often targeted or looted, sometimes in areas under Israeli control. Several aid workers, including international staff, were killed in airstrikes or crossfire. These incidents further complicated efforts to deliver life-saving assistance to Gaza's population and highlighted the dangers faced by those trying to help amidst the chaos of war. Gaza war sparked intense international debate and diplomatic activity. Western allies, including the United States and several European countries, largely supported Israel's right to self-defense but expressed concern over civilian casualties. Many countries in the global south, as well as humanitarian organizations, condemned the scale of destruction and called for an immediate ceasefire. The United Nations Security Council passed resolutions demanding a halt to the fighting, while the International Criminal Court began investigations into alleged war crimes by both sides. Conflict in Gaza did not remain isolated. It triggered a broader regional crisis, with clashes erupting along Israel's borders with Lebanon and Syria. Iranian-backed groups, including Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, launched attacks on Israel and Western interests in the region. The Red Sea crisis saw commercial shipping targeted by Houthi forces, prompting international naval operations. The war also contributed to political instability in neighboring countries and heightened tensions between global powers. While the focus remained on Gaza, violence also surged in the West Bank. Israeli military operations, settler violence, and mass arrests led to hundreds of Palestinian deaths and the displacement of entire communities. The West Bank became a second front in the conflict, with fears of a wider uprising. International organizations accused Israeli forces of excessive use of force and violations of international law, while the Palestinian Authority struggled to maintain control and legitimacy. War saw a dramatic increase in the detention of Palestinians by Israeli authorities. Thousands were held without charge, often in harsh conditions. Reports emerged of torture, abuse, and deaths in custody, particularly in facilities like the SDE Taman detention camp. Healthcare workers, journalists, and aid workers were among those detained. These practices drew condemnation from human rights organizations and added another layer of suffering to the conflict. Amid 2024, Gaza faced a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. The blockade and destruction of infrastructure led to severe shortages of food, water, and medicine. Famine-like conditions emerged, especially in northern Gaza, with children and the elderly most at risk. Hospitals were overwhelmed or destroyed, and disease outbreaks spread rapidly in overcrowded shelters. The United Nations and aid agencies warned that the entire population was at risk of starvation and death from preventable causes. Physical destruction in Gaza reached levels rarely seen in modern warfare. Satellite imagery and on-the-ground reports showed that over half of all buildings were damaged or destroyed, including homes, schools, hospitals, and cultural landmarks. The devastation surpassed that of many historic conflicts, leaving entire neighborhoods uninhabitable. Clearing the rubble and rebuilding will take decades and require massive international support. The concept of domicide, the deliberate destruction of homes, became a central theme in discussions about the war's legacy. Human cost of the Gaza war has been staggering. By late 2025, over 68,000 people had been reported killed, the vast majority of them Palestinians. Women and children made up a significant portion of the casualties. Thousands more were wounded or missing, and many families lost multiple members. The psychological trauma, especially among children, will have lasting effects for generations. A high civilian toll has fueled accusations of war crimes and demands for accountability. Both Israel and Palestinian armed groups have been accused of committing war crimes during the conflict. The United Nations, International Criminal Court, and human rights organizations have documented evidence of indiscriminate attacks, targeting of civilians, use of human shields, and collective punishment. High-profile incidents such as the bombing of hospitals and schools, mass detentions, and the use of starvation as a weapon are under investigation. The pursuit of justice and accountability remains a contentious and unresolved issue. Scale and severity of the Gaza war have led to multiple international legal actions. South Africa brought a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, accusing it of genocide. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for leaders on both sides, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas commanders. These proceedings have intensified global debate over the application of international law, the definition of genocide, and the responsibilities of states and armed groups in conflict. Media coverage of the Gaza war has been intense but also highly contested. Access to Gaza for foreign journalists has been limited, and local reporters have faced extreme risks, with many killed or wounded. Both sides have engaged in information campaigns, spreading competing narratives and accusations of misinformation. Social media has played a major role in shaping public opinion, but has also been a battleground for propaganda and disinformation. The struggle over the narrative is an important dimension of the conflict. Gaza war has had profound diplomatic repercussions. Several countries withdrew ambassadors or cut ties with Israel, while others recognized the state of Palestine in response to the conflict. The war has also revived discussions about a two-state solution and the future of the peace process. Regional alliances have shifted, with some Arab states reassessing normalization with Israel. The United Nations and other international bodies have struggled to mediate a lasting ceasefire, reflecting the deep divisions in global politics. Economic impact of the Gaza war has been severe for both Gaza and Israel. Gaza's economy, already fragile, was devastated by the destruction of infrastructure, loss of livelihoods, and ongoing blockade. Israel faced significant costs from military mobilization, damage to property, and disruptions to trade and tourism. The war also affected regional economies, with shipping in the Red Sea disrupted and investor confidence shaken. Rebuilding Gaza will require massive international aid and long-term commitment. Beyond the physical destruction, the Gaza war has left deep psychological scars. Survivors, especially children, face trauma from loss, displacement, and constant fear. Families have been torn apart and communities shattered. The breakdown of social services, education, and healthcare has long-term consequences for Gaza's future. In Israel, the shock of the October 7 attack and the ongoing threat of rockets have also left a mark on society. Healing and recovery will take years, if not generations. The United States has played a central role in the Gaza war, providing military, financial, and diplomatic support to Israel. American weapon shipments, intelligence sharing, and political backing have been crucial for Israel's military operations. At the same time, the U.S. has faced criticism for vetoing UN ceasefire resolutions and for its perceived double standards on human rights. The war has tested U.S. alliances in the region and influenced domestic debates about foreign policy and military aid. As the war continued, various plans for Gaza's future emerged. Israeli leaders outlined goals of demilitarization, security control, and the removal of Hamas. Proposals ranged from international administration to the return of the Palestinian Authority or even forced displacement of Gazans. The United States, Arab League, and other actors offered their own visions for reconstruction and governance. However, deep mistrust and ongoing violence have made consensus elusive, leaving Gaza's post-war future uncertain. Gaza war has exposed and deepened divisions within Palestinian society. Hamas and the Palestinian Authority led by Fatah have long been rivals. The war saw brief attempts at unity, but also accusations of mismanagement, corruption, and abuse by both sides. Protests against Hamas erupted in Gaza, while the Palestinian Authority struggled to maintain legitimacy in the West Bank. The question of who will govern Gaza after the war remains unresolved and is central to any lasting peace. Children have borne a disproportionate share of the suffering in the Gaza war. Thousands have been killed or injured, and many more have lost parents, siblings, or homes. Schools have been destroyed or repurposed as shelters, disrupting education for an entire generation. The psychological impact of trauma, loss, and instability will affect children's development and prospects for years to come. International agencies have called for urgent action to protect children and restore educational services. War has been deadly for journalists and media workers in Gaza. Over 200 have been killed, making it one of the most dangerous conflicts for the press in recent history. Many were targeted while reporting from the front lines or documenting the aftermath of attacks. The loss of local journalists has made it harder to verify information and tell the stories of those affected. Press freedom organizations have called for investigations and greater protection for media workers. Technology has played a significant role in the Gaza war. Israel used advanced surveillance, drones, and artificial intelligence to identify targets and coordinate operations. The use of AI in warfare has raised ethical questions about accountability and civilian protection. On the Palestinian side, social media and encrypted messaging have been vital for communication and documentation. The digital dimension of the conflict is shaping both the conduct of war and the global conversation about its consequences. Environmental consequences of the Gaza war are severe and long-lasting. The destruction of infrastructure has led to widespread pollution, including contaminated water supplies and hazardous rubble. Agricultural land has been damaged, and food production has collapsed. Clearing the debris and restoring basic services will be a monumental task. Environmental groups warn that the war's impact on Gaza's ecosystem will affect public health and recovery for years to come. Men have faced unique challenges and dangers during the Gaza war. Many have lost family members, become sole providers, or suffered injuries. Reports of sexual violence, both by Palestinian militants and Israeli forces, have emerged, highlighting the vulnerability of women in conflict zones. Despite the hardships, women have played vital roles in caring for families, supporting communities, and advocating for peace. Their voices are essential in any discussion of recovery and reconciliation. War has seen the destruction of numerous religious and cultural landmarks in Gaza. Mosques, churches, and historic sites have been damaged or destroyed by airstrikes and ground operations. The loss of these sites is not only a blow to Gaza's heritage, but also to the identity and resilience of its people. International organizations have condemned attacks on cultural property and called for their protection in accordance with international law. Gaza war has sparked massive protests and solidarity movements around the world. Demonstrations calling for a ceasefire, justice, and humanitarian aid have taken place in major cities across Europe, the Americas, Asia, and Africa. University campuses and civil society groups have played a leading role in raising awareness and pressuring governments to act. The global response reflects the deep emotional and political resonance of the conflict. Disinformation and denial have been persistent challenges throughout the Gaza war. Both sides have accused each other of fabricating evidence, exaggerating casualties, or concealing atrocities. Social media has amplified rumors and conspiracy theories, making it difficult for the public to discern fact from fiction. Independent verification is often hampered by lack of access and the dangers faced by journalists. Combating misinformation is crucial for accountability and informed debate. Throughout the conflict, multiple ceasefires have been attempted, often brokered by international mediators such as Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. While some temporary truces allowed for hostage exchanges and humanitarian aid, none have led to a lasting peace. Negotiations are complicated by deep mistrust, competing demands, and ongoing violence. The search for a durable ceasefire remains a central challenge for diplomats and affected communities alike. Looking ahead, the future of Gaza remains uncertain. The war has left the territory devastated, its population traumatized, and its political leadership in crisis. Rebuilding will require not only physical reconstruction but also social healing, political reform, and international support. The questions of governance, security, and relations with Israel and the broader region will shape Gaza's path forward. The resilience and determination of its people will be crucial in overcoming the immense challenges ahead. Gaza war offers sobering lessons about the costs of unresolved conflict, the limits of military solutions, and the importance of protecting civilians. It highlights the need for genuine dialogue, respect for human rights, and adherence to international law. The suffering endured by both Palestinians and Israelis underscores the urgency of finding a just and lasting peace. As the world reflects on the tragedy of Gaza, the hope remains that future generations will not have to endure similar horrors. International community bears a responsibility to support the victims of the Gaza war and to work toward a sustainable resolution. Humanitarian aid, reconstruction assistance, and diplomatic engagement are essential. At the same time, holding perpetrators of war crimes accountable and addressing the root causes of the conflict are necessary for lasting peace. The Gaza war is a reminder that global challenges require collective action and moral courage. As we conclude this deep dive into the Gaza war, we are left with a sense of both tragedy and hope. The suffering and destruction are undeniable, but so too is the resilience of those who have endured. The path to peace will be long and difficult, but it is not impossible. By learning from the past, supporting those in need, and committing to justice and reconciliation, there is hope for a better future for Gaza, Israel, and the entire region. Thank you for joining us on this journey.